I am Ivan Petrov, a 19-year-old from a small village along the banks of the Volga River. My father is a carpenter, sturdy and quiet, always measuring and carving wood with precision, while my mother keeps our home and watches over my little sister Anya with a tenderness that softens even the harshest winters. I grew up amidst fields of wheat and the steady rhythm of river life, learning the value of hard work and community. Life was simple, predictable, and yet in its simplicity, it was profoundly beautiful. When news of the German advance reached our village, I felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. The thought of foreign boots marching through Volgograd stirred something deep within me, a sense of duty I could not ignore. My childhood games by the river now seemed trivial, replaced by the urgent need to protect my family, my village, and our way of life. I knew that answering the call to arms would take me far from the familiar fields and wooden homes I had always known. I carry with me a notebook, its pages still crisp, in which I intend to record every thought, every fear, and every fleeting hope. Even as I prepare to leave, I write of my dreams, a world free from the roar of artillery evenings spent by the fire, with my mother's warm soup laughter shared with Anya. These memories anchor me a fragile shield against the unknown trials that await. Yet beneath this resolve there is a tremor of doubt. How will I endure the chaos to come? Will I remain whole in body and spirit when the streets of Stalingrad burn and friends fall beside me? I do not know. All I can do is step forward, notebook in hand, heart heavy but steadfast, into a war that will shape me in ways I cannot yet imagine. Before the war reached our village, life moved with a quiet rhythm. Our home was modest but warm, built by my father's strong hands, its wooden walls smelling faintly of pine and varnish. Mornings began with the crowing of roosters and the scent of fresh bread my mother baked. I would help my father in the workshop, learning the art of shaping wood, while Anya chased after the chickens, her laughter spilling like sunlight across our yard. Evenings were our sanctuary. My mother would gather us by the hearth, telling stories of the Volga, of ancestors who endured hardship, instilling in us the pride of our heritage. The village itself was small but vibrant. Neighbors helped each other harvest fields, mend roofs, and share in festivals. Children played along the riverbank barefoot, their shadows stretching long in the golden summer light. I often sat by the water, imagining adventures beyond the horizon, never suspecting that my peaceful world would soon be consumed by fire and gunfire. These simple days shaped me. They taught patience, resilience, and the quiet courage found in ordinary life. They were also a constant reminder of what I now fight to protect. Every smile of Anya, every warm meal, every handcrafted toy was a treasure. The thought of losing it all stills my resolve, even as a shadow of fear lingers in my chest. Soon, these memories will be the only comforts in a city scarred by battle. By the summer of 1942, the world I knew was shifting violently. The German Wehrmacht had already swept across much of Europe, leaving towns and cities in ruin. News traveled slowly to our village, carried on ragged papers and whispered rumors, but the fear it carried was immediate and tangible. I watched neighbors exchange worried glances, mothers clutching children a little tighter, and fathers tightening their grips on tools that could never rival the power of tanks and artillery. Stalingrad, our city on the banks of the Volga, was no longer just a home. It had become a symbol, a fortress, in the hearts of every Soviet citizen. Military reports painted a dire picture. The Germans aimed to seize Stalingrad, to cripple our industry and break our spirit. Factories that once hummed with life now prepared for siege. Railways carried troops and supplies with urgency I had never imagined. Everywhere posters urged courage and sacrifice, calling upon young men like me to step forward. The roar of distant artillery sometimes reached our ears, a grim reminder that the front was closer than we dared to admit. I felt a mixture of awe and dread. The city I had grown up near, with its bustling markets and riverside docks, was transforming into a battlefield. Every step I took towards Stalingrad would be a step into history, one I would either survive to tell or be consumed by like so many before me. In the quiet moments, I held onto the image of my family, the golden fields and the river's gentle flow, the last vestiges of peace before the storm. As I prepared to leave my village, a quiet tension settled over me. I knew that stepping onto the path towards Stalingrad would thrust me into a world far harsher than the gentle fields of the Volga. Weapons were scarce, winter would be unforgiving, and the streets I had once wandered freely were now poised to become a labyrinth of rubble and gunfire. Every tale of comrades falling, every account of civilians trapped under the weight of bombs weighed heavily on my mind. The thought of surviving the chaos seemed almost impossible. Would my body endure the cold, hunger, and relentless artillery? Would my spirit remain intact when friends vanished before my eyes and the city itself was reduced to ashes? Yet despite this fear, a stubborn flame of resolve burned inside me. I could not allow despair to dominate. The lives of my family and the memory of peaceful summers demanded courage. I took to writing in my notebook daily, chronicling my hopes and apprehensions. Each line became a small lifeline, a tether to home, a reminder of what I fight to protect. These entries, simple yet profound, carried both my love for my family and my dread of what awaited me. Every word hinted at the trials to come, the choices I would have to make, and the man I might become amidst the smoke and ruin of Stalingrad. That evening before I left, I held my notebook close and wrote what I hoped would one day be remembered. I recorded the warmth of my mother's hands, the sparkle in Anya's eyes, the quiet strength of my father's shaping wood in the fading sunlight. I wrote of the fields that stretched endlessly, the songs of birds at dawn, and the gentle flow of the Volga. These memories were my armor, fragile yet vital against the uncertainty ahead. But alongside these recollections, I could not ignore the tremor of fear that ran through me. How would I face the streets of Stalingrad, where every corner might conceal death and every sound could herald loss? Would I survive the nights of endless artillery, the frost that gnawed at our bones, the hunger that gnawed at our resolve? I closed the notebook heart heavy but resolute. My journey was about to begin. Tomorrow I would leave the familiar behind, stepping into a storm that would shape me in ways I could not yet comprehend. The path forward was uncertain, but one truth remained. I had to endure for family, for comrades, and for the city that had become the symbol of our survival. The morning I left my village, a cold wind swept along the Volga, carrying the scent of wheat and the distant murmur of the river. My knapsack was heavy with a few belongings. I dared to take a woolen scarf from my mother, a small wooden carving my father had whittled for me, and my notebook, its pages filled with dreams and fears. Every step toward the railway station felt like leaving a piece of my soul behind. My mother clutched my hands tightly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Be careful, Ivan," she whispered, her voice trembling. My father, stoic as always, rested a firm hand on my shoulder, silently conveying both pride and worry. Anya, my little sister, wrapped her arms around my waist and refused to let go. Her sobs echoed through the wooden hallway, a sound I would carry with me into the battlefield. I tried to smile, tried to reassure them, but my throat tightened with a mix of fear and longing. As the train pulled away, I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, watching the familiar fields blur into a landscape I might never see again. Villagers waved, some in quiet prayer, others in solemn acknowledgement of the war that had now touched us all. I clutched my notebook and wrote hurriedly. I leave behind warmth and laughter, but I carry it with me into the storm. May the Volga guide me and my family, keep me safe in spirit. Even as the train rattled along the tracks, the weight of uncertainty settled on my shoulders. I did not know what awaited me in Stalingrad, whether I would survive the first battle or if the city itself would become a tomb. Yet beneath the fear, a quiet determination burned. I would endure, I would fight, and I would return if fate allowed to the family, whose faces now lingered in my heart like a fragile light in the gathering darkness. The first days of training were harsher than I could have imagined. We were herded into the barracks before dawn, the cold seeping through our thin coats and the bitter wind biting at our cheeks as if testing our resolve. The drill instructors barked orders that left no room for hesitation, their voices echoing across the compound like the distant rumble of artillery. Each step, each command, each repetitive motion felt endless, yet I could not falter. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me like the iron of a rifle. We learned quickly that stamina and obedience could mean the difference between life and death. I practiced handling the Mosin Nagant, the wood cool beneath my palms, my finger trembling over the trigger. At first, every shot rang in my ears, a sharp reminder that this weapon was no toy. Running through obstacle courses, crawling through mud, and enduring the piercing cold of early mornings pushed my body to its limits. My muscles ached, my breath came in ragged gasps, yet there was an odd pride in each small accomplishment. Among the recruits, I found companions who shared both fear and determination. We teased each other to mask trembling hands, traded stories of home, and whispered encouragements when the instructor's shouts became unbearable. Some had fought before their eyes hardened by the reality of death, and they offered advice I clung to like a lifeline. I began to understand the fragile camaraderie that binds soldiers together. the silent trust that forms in the shadows of fear. Evenings were a time for reflection. I wrote in my notebook about the sensations of the day, the ache of muscles, the sting of cold, the camaraderie of new friends, and the growing awareness that the world beyond the barracks was burning. The war was no longer a distant rumor. It was here shaping our every movement. I felt both anticipation and dread for the battles to come, but also a stubborn flicker of confidence. I had learned in those grueling days that the mind could endure far more than the body, and that survival depended not just on strength, but on focus, courage, and the bonds formed in shared struggle. The day I received my first assignment, a mixture of excitement and dread churned in my stomach. The commanding officer handed me orders with a stern glance, his voice curt. We were to patrol the outskirts of a partially destroyed factory district near Stalingrad, reporting any signs of enemy movement and ensuring the safety of the faked workers who remained. I had studied drills and tactics for weeks, yet nothing could fully prepare me for the reality of stepping into a city that already bore the scars of war. I gathered with my small unit, each of us carrying a rifle, a few rounds of ammunition, and an unspoken fear. My heart pounded as I adjusted the strap of my pack, thinking of the fields I had left behind, the faces of my family, and the notebook tucked close to my chest. Stay alert, the squad leader murmured, scanning the smoke-filled horizon. Trust your comrades. Watch each other's backs. The streets were eerie. Buildings were reduced to jagged skeletons, windows, shattered walls, blackened by fire. Occasionally, the distant crack of rifle fire or the rumble of artillery reminded us that danger was never far. Civilians huddled in basements or moved cautiously, their eyes wide with anxiety. I kept my gaze forward, noting each sound and shadow, each flicker of movement, as if reading a book written in fear and survival. During a brief pause behind a crumbling wall, my comrade Dmitri whispered, "It's nothing like training, Ivan. Out here, every step could be your last." I nodded, gripping my rifle tighter. In my notebook, I scribbled hurried lines. The city breathes war. Every brick, every shattered window tells a story of loss. I am a small part of something immense, and yet I feel the weight of each moment pressing on me. By the end of the day, I understood that this assignment was more than reconnaissance. It was a test of nerve, of observation, and of trust. The lessons of the barracks were only a prelude. The streets of Stalingrad would teach me the truth about fear, courage, and what it truly meant to be a soldier. The following days brought a relentless mix of routine patrols and sudden chaotic confrontations. Stalingrad was no longer just a city. It was a fortress under siege, and every street, alley, and building bore the scars of constant bombardment. From the safety of our temporary post in a half-collapsed apartment block, I watched columns of German soldiers advance cautiously, their silhouettes blurred by smoke and dust. Farther down, the Volga barges carried supplies to the embattled defenders, a reminder of how critical the city had become in the grand strategy of the Eastern Front. We encountered the war's human cost almost immediately. Civilians emerged from the rubble faces streaked with soot and fear, clutching whatever they could carry. Some begged us for food, others simply stared frozen by shock. I helped a young boy whose mother had been injured, feeling an unfamiliar mix of sorrow and helplessness. Each encounter was a stark lesson. This war would consume not only soldiers but entire communities. The battlefields of the city were a cruel classroom. I saw men I had trained alongside fall under sporadic gunfire, their screams echoing through the shattered streets. Dmitri, my companion on patrol, was grazed by a bullet near the shoulder, and I instinctively dragged him behind cover, heart pounding, mind racing with fear and adrenaline. Training drills had taught me the mechanics of movement and cover, but they could not prepare me for the chaos, the smell of smoke and blood, or the constant tension that made every heartbeat feel fragile. In quiet moments, I wrote furiously in my notebook, chronicling each scene, the cries, the rubble, the fleeting glimmers of courage and humanity. I tried to make sense of the city's destruction, of the strategy behind it, and of my place within this inferno. Historical reports spoke of the German offensive Operation Blue and the strategic importance of the Volga. Yet on the ground, these names mattered little. What mattered was survival, protecting comrades, and learning quickly to navigate a world where death was a constant companion. By the end of the week, I felt a subtle shift within me. Fear remained, yes, but it was tempered by awareness and focus. Each patrol, each observation, each decision carried weight, and with it came a grim understanding. The war was not just a distant plan or a headline. It was lived in every shattered building, every terrified glance, every moment I breathed the smoky air of Stalingrad. Amid the smoke and rubble of Stalingrad, I began to understand that survival depended as much on the people beside me as on my own skills. My squad became a fragile, vital family. We shared whispered jokes to mask fear-traded scraps of food when rations ran low and covered each other's backs during patrols. In those fleeting moments of camaraderie, I felt a warmth that cut through the cold and the dread, a reminder that even in war, human connection could endure. Dmitri, the one grazed by a bullet on our first assignment, became a constant companion. We spoke little, but our unspoken understanding grew with each patrol. When a stray shell sent us diving behind a crumbling wall, our eyes met, and I knew he understood my fears as I did his. Others in the squad, seasoned veterans or fresh recruits like me, offered lessons in quick-thinking patience and the courage to move forward despite the unknown. Every shared glance, every word of encouragement became a lifeline. Night patrols were the ultimate test of trust. The city was alive with distant explosions, the sharp crack of rifles, and the low hum of tanks. Each step we took had to be measured, coordinated, precise. One wrong move could spell death. Yet amid the tension there was solidarity. When I felt my hands shake, a comrade would grip my shoulder. When someone faltered, we reminded each other of the stakes, our city, our families, our own lives. I wrote extensively in my notebook each night, chronicling both fear and small triumphs. I recorded how Dmitri and I shared memories of home, how we improvised in the midst of chaos, how even a shared loaf of bread could feel like salvation. Slowly, I realized that courage was contagious. The more I supported my comrades, the stronger we all became. Bonds forged in hardship were unbreakable, and our collective determination formed a shield against despair. By the end of my first weeks on the front, I felt a subtle transformation. The boy who had left Volgograd trembling and uncertain was learning to stand taller, to observe more sharply, and to act decisively. I had discovered that the essence of survival was not merely physical skill, but trust, loyalty, and the unwavering commitment to those who shared the battlefield with me. By the end of those first weeks, I had seen enough to understand that Stalingrad was unlike any place I had ever known. The city's streets, once familiar in stories and distant memories, were now a labyrinth of ruin, each corner hiding danger, each building a potential tomb. Yet in the midst of smoke, rubble, and the constant roar of artillery, I discovered the strength within myself and among my comrades. We had learned to move as one, to anticipate each other's actions, and to support each other when fear threatened to take hold. The bonds forged in these early days became the backbone of our resilience. I wrote in my notebook that survival was no longer an individual endeavor, it was a shared responsibility, a pact of trust and courage that bound us together. Despite the constant tension, a stubborn spark of determination remained. I was no longer just Ivan Petrov, the boy from Volgograd. I was part of something larger, a living force defending our city, our families, and our homeland. Ahead lay the inferno of Stalingrad's fiercest battles, and I could only hope that the lessons, courage, and bonds I had formed so far would carry me through the horrors yet to come. The morning fog hung low over the streets of Stalingrad, carrying with it the acrid scent of smoke and dust. I could barely see beyond a few meters, and yet the city seemed alive with danger. The Red October factory loomed ahead, half ruined and scarred from previous bombardments. Our orders were clear: hold the position at all costs, repel any German advance, and protect the civilians who had nowhere else to go. My heart raced a drumbeat, matching the distant roar of artillery that never seemed to cease. We moved cautiously, every step calculated, every shadow suspect. The streets were littered with debris, the carcasses of burned-out vehicles, and the shattered remnants of buildings that once hummed with life. Occasionally, a distant rifle shot would crack through the fog, and we would dive for cover instinctively. My hands were clammy on my rifle, my mind oscillating between fear and the instinct to act. The lessons from the barracks stance-aim movement were now all that separated me from death. The first clash was sudden. A group of German soldiers appeared between two crumbling walls, their silhouettes stark against the gray haze. Orders were shouted, and we returned fire. The air was filled with the deafening roar of automatic weapons, the whistle of bullets, and the harsh staccato of explosions. Dmitri, my companion, fired rapidly, his face pale but determined. I squeezed the trigger, each shot a desperate plea to survive, to protect the small glimmers of humanity in the chaos around me. Amid the firefight, a young civilian stumbled into our line of sight, eyes wide with terror. My instincts kicked in. I shouted for him to stay low and dragged him behind a battered wall. Moments later, a shell struck a nearby building, sending bricks and dust raining down. The ground shook beneath us, and for a heartbeat, I felt as if the world itself might collapse. Comrades fell beside me, some screaming, some silent, leaving only the eerie echoes of their final moments. I found myself crawling through the rubble hard, pounding, trying to locate a safer vantage point. The factory's skeletal remains offered little protection. Each corner seemed to hide death. Yet, amid the chaos, there were brief moments of clarity. I could see the teamwork, the unspoken understanding between soldiers, the small acts of bravery that kept us alive. We covered each other, shouted warnings, and shared what little ammunition and courage we had. By the end of that grueling morning, I was exhausted, trembling, and yet alive. I sank against a broken wall, watching the smoke rise over the city. I opened my notebook with shaking hands and scribbled, "Today, Stalingrad taught me the meaning of fear and the value of life. I have seen death, close smelled it, and felt it brush past me. Yet I am still here, bound to my comrades and to the city that refuses to fall." That battle was only the beginning. I realized in the deepest part of my being that Stalingrad would not simply test my strength, it would strip away everything I knew about courage, survival, and humanity. The lessons learned here would shape every moment to come, forging me into a soldier in ways I could not yet fully understand. The aftermath of the first major battle left a silence that was almost unbearable. The air still smelled of smoke, gunpowder, and blood, and the streets were littered with the broken forms of men who had fought and fallen beside me. I stumbled over a fallen comrade, his face, pale eyes, staring blankly at the gray sky above. My hand shook as I touched his shoulder, wishing I could somehow pull him back from the edge of death, wishing I could reverse the bullets that had claimed him. Dmitri, who had survived the initial clash, crouched beside me, his expression tight, voice low. "We can't save them all. We have to move." I nodded, swallowing hard, feeling a lump of grief lodge deep in my throat. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of every fallen friend was pressing upon me, trying to pull me down into despair. In quieter moments, I thought back to the men I had grown to trust during training, those who had shared bread, laughter, and whispered encouragements during the long nights. And now some were gone, leaving only memories and the haunting knowledge that survival came at a cost I had never imagined. My notebook became a lifeline, a place to pour my sorrow, my anger, and my fear. "They are gone," I wrote, "but their courage lives within me. I must honor them by continuing to fight by surviving." The city itself seemed to mourn with us. The streets were empty, the buildings hollowed by shells, and distant cries of civilians added to the chorus of despair. I began to understand that loss was not just personal, it was universal here. Every fallen soldier, every destroyed home, every shuddering building carried a story of sacrifice, grief, and courage. Yet amid the mourning, small sparks of resilience appeared. A comrade who had been terrified moments ago steadied another's hands, and I found myself offering guidance, encouragement, and even a faint smile to those around me. It was a strange contradiction, grief and hope coexisting in the same breath, binding us together in ways stronger than any chain. By nightfall, I sat against a shattered wall, the notebook open on my lap. I recorded each loss, each face, each act of bravery I had witnessed. The city was quiet now, but the memories of screams and gunfire would not fade. I realized in that moment that Stalingrad demanded more than courage. It demanded endurance, emotional strength, and the willingness to bear the burden of every fallen comrade. And I knew deep in my heart that I would carry this weight with me for the battles yet to come. The next day, our squad was ordered to advance toward a partially destroyed street on the eastern edge of the city. The morning was eerily calm, a deceptive silence that seemed to hold its breath before the chaos. We moved cautiously, alert to every shadow and sound, when suddenly a hail of bullets cut through the air. A German sniper had a clear line of sight, and before I could react, pain flared sharply in my left shoulder. I fell to the ground, the rifle slipping from my hands, my vision blurring at the edges. The world around me became a disorienting mix of smoke, dust, and the screams of comrades. Dimitri's voice reached me strained and urgent. "Ivan, get down, stay low." But movement was agony. Each breath brought a searing jolt through my arm and chest. I could feel the blood soaking into my uniform, the warmth mingling with the cold morning air. Dragged behind the remnants of a collapsed wall, I watched as soldiers we had trained alongside fell around me. The thought of capture flickered in my mind. What would they do with me if I were taken? The propaganda and stories of German discipline flashed through my head, and a shiver of fear ran down my spine. Yet even in pain, instinct took over. I focused on breathing steadily, assessing my surroundings, and finding a path to temporary safety. The squad leader motioned for a medic to reach me, and as hands lifted me away from the line of fire, I felt a mix of relief and helplessness. The battle continued around us, each explosion shaking the ground, every gunshot a reminder that the city had become a living tomb. In those moments, I realized that survival was not guaranteed by skill alone. It demanded luck, quick thinking, and the unwavering support of comrades. Later, in a makeshift field hospital, I watched the medics work tirelessly to stabilize the wounded. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Pain radiated through my shoulder and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to write in my notebook, detailing each sensation, each sound, each thought racing through my mind. I am alive, though my body protests. I have seen how thin the line is between life and death, and I have learned to respect it. Tomorrow, if I can move, I will return to the fight. There is no other choice. That day, I understood the fragility of existence in Stalingrad. Wounds healed slowly, fear lingered, and the city demanded every ounce of courage we possessed. But even amidst suffering, the resolve to survive and fight burned brighter than any fear, forging in me a hardened determination for the trials yet to come. In the days that followed, the line between right and wrong became blurred in the smoke and ruin of Stalingrad. I had learned to fire, to crawl through rubble, to survive the bullets and shells, but I had not been prepared for the moral weight of what I witnessed. Civilians huddled in basements, their eyes wide with terror, families torn apart by indiscriminate artillery. Children cried for parents who would never return. The city, once vibrant, now seemed a theater of despair, and every step I took felt like walking over the fragile lives of innocents. I grappled with a gnawing question. What does it mean to fight for one's homeland when the cost is so immense? A neighbor I had known from before the war lay dead in a street I had walked as a boy. Soldiers around me carried out orders without hesitation, but I struggled with each command, wondering if survival justified the destruction we witnessed. My training had prepared me for tactics, but it did not prepare me for this ethical labyrinth where bullets could not distinguish between soldier and civilian. In quiet moments, I recorded my thoughts in my notebook. I thought courage was enough, but I see now that fear, doubt, and conscience fight within every heartbeat. How many lives are worth the ground we defend? How many more must fall before victory can be claimed? These entries became confessions, a way to maintain a thread of humanity amidst relentless chaos. Yet even in fear, a subtle transformation began. Witnessing the courage of civilians who hid children, carried the wounded, or shared meager rations, I realized that strength was not only in weapons, but in resilience and compassion. I began to reconcile the duality of war demanded ruthlessness to survive, yet also preserved glimpses of humanity in the most unlikely places. My perspective shifted further as I watched comrades make split-second decisions, saving lives at great personal risk. I saw how moral courage could coexist with violence, how sacrifice and conscience intertwined on the battlefield. Slowly, I understood that survival was not just about evading bullets, but about preserving a sense of purpose and ethics even when surrounded by devastation. By the end of those harrowing days, I felt a grim clarity. Fear remained, but it was tempered by understanding. I would continue to fight not only for the city or my homeland, but to honor the lives lost and to navigate the moral maze that Stalingrad had imposed upon us all. In this crucible of fire, I was learning not only how to survive, but what it truly meant to remain human. Stalingrad revealed itself as a city transformed into a living battlefield. The streets once bustling with commerce and laughter were now jagged corridors of destruction. Buildings were hollowed out shells, walls riddled with bullet holes, windows shattered and jagged. Smoke curled from smoldering ruins carrying the acrid smell of burned wood, metal, and human bodies. Each step forward felt precarious, the rubble threatening to collapse beneath our weight, and every distant crack of rifle fire reminded me that death was never far. The air itself seemed hostile. Dust and ash clung to our uniforms, mingling with the stench of gunpowder and blood. Cold winter winds cut through gaps in tattered coats, making my teeth chatter and my hands numb. Nights were no relief. Artillery shells thudded rhythmically in the darkness, punctuated by sporadic bursts of machine gun fire. Shadows moved with deceptive speed, and the tiniest noise, a creaking beam, a falling brick, triggered immediate fear. My senses sharpened to survival mode. I could hear the distant rumble of tanks, feel the vibrations of nearby explosions, and smell smoke before it reached my nostrils. The human cost was everywhere. Civilians pressed into makeshift shelters, eyes wide, with terror children clinging to mother's skirt. Corpses lay where they had fallen, some barely recognizable, others hauntingly familiar in silhouette or clothing. Comrades who had joked and shared stories in training now lay motionless, and the city itself seemed to mourn with us. Every street corner, every burned-out vehicle told a story of sacrifice, courage, and indiscriminate loss. We adapted, learning to navigate this chaos with instinct and coordination. I ducked behind walls, signaled to comrades, and moved with careful precision, always aware that a single misstep could mean the end. Yet, amidst the destruction, brief moments of humanity persisted: a soldier sharing his meager rations, a civilian guiding the wounded to safety, a whispered joke exchanged behind cover. These flashes reminded me that life persisted even here, that courage and compassion could coexist with terror and violence. By the end of each day, exhaustion weighed on my body and fear weighed on my mind. Yet I wrote in my notebook chronicling not only the horrors but also the lessons: how to read the city, how to anticipate danger, and how to maintain focus under relentless pressure. I reflected on the duality of Stalingrad, its capacity to destroy utterly and yet to inspire resilience. In that crucible, I realized that the environment was not just a backdrop for survival. It was a teacher, a harsh mentor, shaping every thought, every movement, every heartbeat. The city demanded everything: strength, awareness, courage, and moral resolve. I understood that only by respecting its lessons could I hope to endure the inferno that lay ahead, and that each step I took through smoke and ruin brought me closer to the man I was becoming, forged in fire, fear, and the unyielding spirit of Stalingrad. The day began like any other, though. In Stalingrad, ordinary days were measured in survival rather than routine. We were advancing cautiously along a narrow street weaving between the skeletons of burned-out buildings, when a sudden artillery strike sent a nearby wall crashing down. Dust and debris engulfed me, and I barely managed to shield my head with my arms. When the smoke cleared, I realized I was separated from my squad, trapped within the skeletal remains of what had once been a small factory. Panic surged, but I forced myself to breathe steadily, scanning the ruins for exits. The building groaned under the impact of further shelling, and every movement stirred a cascade of rubble. I could hear distant gunfire and the muffled shouts of comrades calling my name. Instinct overtook fear. I moved carefully, testing the stability of the floorboards, listening for signs of enemy presence, and keeping my rifle close. Each step was a negotiation with death, each breath a reminder that a single misjudgment could end my life. Then I heard a faint cry, a child trapped under debris in a collapsed corner. Without hesitation, I crawled toward the sound, pushing away fallen beams and stones. My hands were scraped and bloodied, but I refused to stop. Finally, I reached the child, shielding her with my body as another shell shook the building. In that instant, all fear, exhaustion, and pain seemed to crystallize into a singular purpose: survival and protection. With great effort, I carried her to a safer corner where I could wait for help without exposing us further to enemy fire. Hours passed in a tense limbo. I scribbled furiously in my notebook, recording every detail: the tremor of the building, the child's frightened eyes, the distant crack of gunfire. This city teaches lessons in both courage and humility, I wrote. To survive is to act, to protect, and to bear witness. Every life spared is a small victory, every breath a defiance of the chaos surrounding us. When reinforcements finally arrived, I handed the child over to a medic and rejoined my squad, shaken but resolute. The incident left me with a profound understanding of the war's duality: destruction and heroism, terror and compassion, death and survival intertwined in every heartbeat. I realized that Stalingrad demanded more than physical endurance. It demanded quick thinking, moral courage, and the capacity to act decisively under pressure. By nightfall, as I rested against the cold ruins, my notebook open, I reflected on what had transpired. The city had tested me, challenged every instinct, and forced me to confront both my fears and my humanity. I had survived, yes, but I had also learned what it truly meant to carry responsibility not only for my own life, but for those around me. Stalingrad had forged me, shaping the soldier I had become and the man I was still trying to understand. As the smoke of the day's battle settled over Stalingrad, I finally allowed myself a moment of stillness. The city around me was a landscape of ruined streets, crumbled buildings hollowed, and the distant cries of the wounded and dying lingering in the air. Each fallen comrade weighed on me like a stone pressing against my chest. Dmitri friends I had trained with civilians who had crossed our path, they were all etched into my memory reminders of both the fragility of life and the immense cost of survival. Yet within this devastation, a strange clarity emerged. I recognized that fear, grief, and chaos could coexist with courage, resilience, and fleeting moments of humanity. I had seen acts of bravery and selflessness that transcended bullets and rubble, and in them I found the strength to endure. My notebook was filled with sketches of the day, the layout of ruined streets, the sounds of gunfire, the faces of the living and dead alike. Each entry was a testament, a way to preserve the lessons and emotions that no formal training could convey. By nightfall, exhaustion and adrenaline left me hollow but resolute. I realized that the battles ahead would demand more than strength. They would test my endurance, my conscience, and my capacity to remain human in a place designed to strip humanity away. The city had already shaped me in ways I could barely comprehend. Ahead lay further trials, moral dilemmas, and the relentless storm of Stalingrad's inferno, and I knew that whatever awaited, the lessons learned in these days of fire would carry me through the darkness. The days following the battle were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and uneasy quiet. My shoulder throbbed constantly, a reminder of the sniper's bullet that had nearly claimed me, and every movement sent sharp jolts through my body. The field hospital was overcrowded, filled with groaning men, the smell of antiseptic, and the steady murmur of medics working tirelessly to patch up the wounded. Sleep was scarce. The echo of gunfire and the distant rumble of artillery haunted even the darkest hours. Physically, I was weakened, but it was the mental toll that weighed heaviest. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the streets of Stalingrad, the shattered buildings, the twisted forms of comrades, the terrified civilians huddled in ruined corners. The memories of screams and the acrid scent of smoke clung to me, refusing to let go. Anxiety settled in my chest, sometimes so intense that my breath caught and my hands shook uncontrollably. I began to write obsessively in my notebook, trying to make sense of the chaos. I am alive, yet the ghosts of today walk beside me. Every face, every cry is etched into my mind. Sleep offers no solace, only dreams that replay the city's destruction I penned, seeking to release the pressure building within me. Even amidst the despair, I felt a quiet resolve forming. I realized that healing both body and mind would require more than time it would demand: focus, determination, and the support of those around me. I spoke with medics and fellow soldiers, sharing fears and listening to their own struggles. Slowly, I began to understand that acknowledging vulnerability was not weakness. It was a step toward endurance. By the end of the week, though, pain lingered and memories refused to fade. I felt a fragile sense of control returning. My body was battered, my mind scarred, but the will to survive and continue fighting remained unbroken. Stalingrad had left its mark on me, shaping not only my flesh, but my spirit, demanding that I grow stronger in ways I had never imagined. Even as I tended to my wounds, news of fallen comrades reached me like a relentless tide. Faces I had come to trust, the men who had shared rations, whispered encouragements, and covered my back in the chaos of battle, were gone. Some had been struck down in the streets, others crushed beneath crumbling buildings. The realization sank deep, a cold weight pressing on my chest, mingling with the lingering pain in my shoulder. I remembered Dmitri's first injury, and the fear that had surged through me when I dragged him behind a shattered wall. Now others had not been so fortunate. I walked cautiously through the ruins, eyes scanning every shadow, heart aching with each familiar face I did not find. The city itself seemed to mourn with us. Smoke hung heavy over empty streets, and the groans of the wounded echoed through hollowed buildings. In quiet moments, I wrote feverishly in my notebook, chronicling the names, the laughter, and the acts of bravery of those we had lost. They are gone, yet their courage remains a fire I must carry forward. To falter now would dishonor them. Every step I take is for them, every breath a promise that their sacrifice was not in vain. Writing became a ritual, a way to preserve their memory and fortify my resolve. The psychological toll was immense. Grief intertwined with survivor's guilt, and I found myself questioning the fairness of life and the arbitrary nature of death in war. Yet, amidst the sorrow, a quiet determination emerged. I could not allow despair to paralyze me. The city, the mission, and the comrades still alive depended on steadfastness. Loss had become a harsh teacher, instilling in me a deeper sense of responsibility. The understanding that survival was not simply personal, it was collective, bound to the memory and well-being of those who had fallen and those who remained. A week after returning from the front lines, I was summoned by our commanding officer. The new assignment weighed heavily in my mind before it was even spoken. I was to serve as a forward observer for artillery guiding shells toward enemy positions and occasionally leading small groups of civilians through dangerous streets. The responsibility was immense. Every decision I made could mean life or death not only for myself, but for those depending on me. I felt a knot of fear tighten in my chest. I had survived injuries, seen comrades fall, and navigated the chaos of Stalingrad, yet this was different. This was not merely reacting to danger. It was orchestrating the actions of others, steering them through a city that seemed intent on consuming us all. Could I bear the weight of choices that might end lives, if made wrongly, I wondered. Dmitri placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, his gaze steady. Ivan, you've survived because you think, because you observe. Trust yourself now. I nodded though. Doubt still lingered. Training had prepared me for tactics and firearms, but it had not prepared me for moral responsibility on this scale. The first mission was tense. Leading a group of civilians through a bombed-out street, I signaled silently, choosing the path that seemed safest. Shells whistled overhead and debris fell around us. Each step demanded split-second decisions. I realized that hesitation could be fatal. Every instinct, every observation, every ounce of courage was necessary. My notebook always by my side captured my thoughts. Every choice carries weight. I must act decisively yet with care. This is no longer only about survival, it is about guiding others through death itself. When we reached temporary safety, I felt a profound shift in myself. I was no longer merely a soldier reacting to orders. I was a decision maker, a guardian, and a witness to the fragility and resilience of life. The city, with all its chaos and destruction, had forced me to grow faster than I ever imagined. By nightfall, I understood that my role had changed irrevocably. Stalingrad had taught me that bravery was not just the courage to fight, it was the courage to make impossible choices, to weigh life against life, and to carry the consequences of those decisions. I had been shaped by fire, fear, and responsibility, and I could not unlearn the lessons that would guide me through the battles yet to come. The following days forced me to adapt quickly to my new responsibilities. No longer simply a soldier in the front lines, I was now a guide, a protector, and an observer, balancing the lives of civilians and the safety of my comrades against the unpredictable chaos of Stalingrad. Each assignment was a delicate dance with death, where hesitation could be fatal and quick, precise decisions were the only path to survival. One morning, I led a small group of villagers through a maze of ruined streets. The remnants of buildings formed narrow corridors littered with debris and the occasional body of those who had not been so lucky. Each shadow seemed to move with menace. Every distant crack of a gunshot or whistle of a shell sent hearts racing. I clutched my rifle scanning for threats while simultaneously guiding those who relied on me, offering calm words despite the turmoil in my chest. Occasionally, I encountered injured comrades or frightened civilians frozen with fear. I helped lift them, signaling to others to provide cover while calculating the safest route through the labyrinth of destruction. My mind raced constantly which street to take, when to pause, when to sprint, which buildings were stable, and which could collapse at any moment. Survival depended on observation, intuition, and a willingness to act decisively under immense pressure. At night, we reached a temporary safe haven, a shell of a building barely standing amid the ruins. Exhausted, I sank to the floor, my notebook trembling in my hands. I wrote rapidly, recording every detail, the debris, the fearful eyes, the sounds of gunfire and falling masonry. Each step is a lesson. Each life I guide through these streets teaches me more about courage, responsibility, and endurance than any training ever could. Through these missions, I began to see the city not only as a battlefield, but as a teacher. Stalingrad demanded resilience, observation, and ingenuity. I learned to read the rubble, predict danger, and act decisively. With each successful journey, my confidence grew tempered by the constant reminder that one mistake could undo everything. By the end of the week, I understood that survival in Stalingrad was not about luck alone. It required vigilance, courage, and a willingness to bear the weight of responsibility. I was no longer just Ivan Petrov, the boy who left Volgograd. I had become a soldier, capable of guiding, protecting, and surviving amidst fire and ruin. The city had shaped me further, and I knew that more challenges lay ahead, each demanding that I adapt, endure, and fight on. As the days in Stalingrad stretched on, I found myself pausing more often, reflecting on the path that had led me here and the transformation I had undergone. The boy who had left Volgograd trembling and uncertain now felt like a distant memory. The city with its ruins and relentless chaos had stripped away my innocence, but it had also instilled a deeper understanding of courage, responsibility, and human resilience. I wrote in my notebook almost daily, attempting to capture the lessons forged in fire and fear. Survival is more than endurance, it is awareness, decisiveness, and compassion. The battlefield does not forgive hesitation yet, it rewards clarity and courage. I have learned that strength is not measured by the absence of fear, but by the ability to act despite it. Each entry became a mirror reflecting both the man I had been and the soldier I was becoming. The losses I endured, friends, comrades, and civilians, left scars deeper than any wound. Yet in witnessing their bravery, I found the seed of moral strength. I understood that heroism was not only about acts of violence against the enemy, but about protecting, guiding, and preserving life whenever possible. Every small victory, every life saved, reinforced the value of empathy amidst brutality. I also began to see the broader tapestry of the war. Stalingrad was more than a city under siege. It was a symbol of resistance, determination, and the unyielding spirit of a people. Each decision, each risk, each action contributed to a collective effort that transcended individual survival. I felt pride not in personal accolades, but in the knowledge that my choices, however small, mattered in the struggle for our city and our homeland. By the end of these weeks, I had changed fundamentally. Fear remained, but it was tempered by wisdom. Pain lingered, yet it carried lessons about endurance and human capacity. And perhaps most importantly, I had come to recognize that the measure of a soldier was not only in combat, but in reflection, understanding the value of life, the weight of responsibility, and the importance of holding on to humanity even amidst unimaginable destruction. Stalingrad had claimed so much, yet it had given me something invaluable. The knowledge that even in the most harrowing circumstances, growth, resilience, and moral clarity were possible. I was no longer just surviving. I was learning to live with purpose amidst the ruins. By the time the dust settled over Stalingrad, I could feel the war's permanent imprint on both body and mind. My shoulder remained stiff, a constant reminder of the sniper's bullet, and my spirit carried the invisible scars of loss, fear, and relentless responsibility. Yet amid exhaustion and pain, I recognized the transformation within me. I had evolved from a boy from Volgograd into a soldier tempered by fire, adversity, and impossible choices. The losses, the injuries, and the harrowing missions had forced me to confront the fragility of life and the weight of duty. Each decision I had made, whether to guide civilians through ruined streets, to risk my own safety for comrades, or to act decisively under fire, had carved lessons into my consciousness. Survival was no longer a passive act. It was an active, continuous struggle requiring courage, judgment, and moral clarity. In my notebook, I chronicled these experiences, seeking to preserve both the horrors and the moments of humanity I had witnessed. I have seen death, despair, and ruin, I wrote. Yet I have also seen courage, compassion, and resilience. These lessons will stay with me, shaping every step forward, every choice, every heartbeat. As I prepared for the next phase of the war, I understood that Stalingrad had done more than test my strength. It had irrevocably altered my perspective, my priorities, and my sense of self. Ahead lay further battles, uncertainty, and sacrifice, but I faced them with a tempered resolve. I was no longer the same Ivan who had left home weeks ago. I was a soldier forged in the crucible of fire, ready to endure whatever the city and the war would demand next. The streets of Stalingrad were eerily silent as the final echoes of artillery faded into the distance. After months of relentless combat, the city, scarred and battered, had finally been secured. I walked through the rubble-strewn avenues, my rifle slung loosely over my shoulder, each step a reminder of the comrades who would never walk beside me again. Relief mingled with exhaustion, joy with sorrow, as the reality of survival settled heavily on my chest. The city had been transformed beyond recognition. Burned-out buildings, twisted metal, and shattered windows bore witness to the inferno we had endured. Amid the devastation, pockets of life emerged, civilians cautiously emerging from basement, soldiers tending to the wounded, and small gestures of resilience in the midst of ruin. I paused by a collapsed wall, writing in my notebook, trying to capture the enormity of what we had survived. Stalingrad has cost more than I can measure yet. It has proven the strength of courage and the depth of sacrifice. Those who fell will not be forgotten, and those of us who remain must carry their memory forward. I felt a quiet pride, tempered by grief. Though we had won, the victory was etched with loss, pain, and uncountable hardships. The city and its people had endured, and so had I forever changed by fire, fear, and duty. The war had tested every fiber of my being, and in surviving, I had come to understand both the fragility and resilience of life. Even after the gunfire ceased and the smoke cleared, the war's impact lingered relentlessly. My shoulder ached constantly, a sharp reminder of the bullet that had pierced flesh and bone. Sleep was elusive. The nights brought vivid dreams of collapsing buildings, screams of comrades, and the relentless whine of shells. Each time I closed my eyes, memories of loss and chaos resurfaced unbidden and unrelenting. The psychological toll was heavier than any physical wound. Survivor's guilt gnawed at me, a quiet, persistent companion. Faces of friends lost in the inferno haunted my thoughts, and I questioned my own luck, my own right to live when so many had fallen. Anxiety lingered like a shadow in even mundane sounds. The creak of a door, the distant hum of machinery could trigger a flashback. Yet through it all, small threads of resilience held me together. I wrote obsessively in my notebook, using words to confront the memories, to acknowledge the trauma, and to preserve the honor of those who had not survived. The body may heal, but the mind carries the weight of what we have seen. Each scar, each nightmare is a testament to endurance, a reminder of responsibility and the cost of survival. Gradually, I learned to navigate the city and my thoughts with cautious attention, drawing on the lessons of courage, observation, and moral resolve instilled in Stalingrad. Though the pain remained both visible and invisible, it shaped me into someone capable of enduring, reflecting, and ultimately carrying forward the lessons of war, memory, and human resilience. In the quiet moments after the fighting, I found myself reflecting deeply on what we had endured and the price we had paid. Stalingrad had demanded everything: blood, courage, and unyielding resolve. But it had also forced me to confront the value of life itself. I realized that the sacrifices of my comrades, of the civilians who had suffered alongside us, were not simply casualties of war. They were profound reminders of the preciousness of peace and the fragility of human existence. I thought of Dmitri, of friends who had fallen, and of the families we had protected. Each act of bravery, each decision to risk our own lives for others carried a weight far beyond strategy or duty. It was a moral reckoning, teaching me that true courage lies not only in facing the enemy, but in acknowledging responsibility for the lives entrusted to you, in making choices guided by conscience even amidst chaos. Writing in my notebook, I struggled to capture the complexity of these lessons. War shows us the depths of human cruelty, but it also illuminates the heights of compassion. Every sacrifice, every act of courage must be remembered. To survive is to honor them, to live with awareness of the lives lost, and to carry forward the responsibility that their absence imposes. Through reflection, I began to grasp the delicate balance between survival and morality, between action and remembrance. I understood that the ultimate lesson of Stalingrad was not simply endurance under fire, but the ability to preserve one's humanity, to recognize the cost of conflict, and to embrace the responsibility to uphold life and peace wherever possible. In these realizations, I found a compass for the future, a guide to living with purpose beyond the shadows of war. I stood on the banks of the Volga once more, the city of my youth now, a distant memory layered beneath the scars of Stalingrad. The river flowed steadily, indifferent to the horrors that had unfolded along its edges, carrying with it both the echoes of loss and the quiet promise of continuity. I traced the familiar curves of its waters with my gaze, thinking of the friends who had fallen, the civilians we had guided through fire and rubble, and the countless lives forever altered by war. The weight of experience pressed upon me, a mixture of grief, gratitude, and humility. Every scar on my body, every tremor in my hands, and every shadow in my mind was a testament to survival resilience and the human cost of conflict. I realized that war has shaped me not only as a soldier, but as a witness to courage, to sacrifice, and to the unyielding strength of the human spirit. In my notebook, I wrote the final lines, words meant to endure beyond the chaos. I have seen death and destruction, despair and cruelty, yet I have also seen hope, bravery, and compassion. Stalingrad has taken much, but it has given the understanding that life in all its fragility is sacred. Those who endured, those who fell, and those yet to come are bound together by memory and responsibility. To remember is to honor. To survive is to carry the lessons forward. As I walked away from the ruins, I felt the indelible mark of the city and the war, a permanent imprint of fire, fear, and humanity. Though the battles had ended, the memories remained echoing in every heartbeat. And in those echoes, I understood the ultimate truth that even amidst devastation, the human spirit can endure, reflect, and hope. War teaches harsh lessons, but it also reminds us why peace is precious and why the lives lost must never be forgotten. Stalingrad had forged me, and through its trials, I carry forward a resolve, a memory, and a testament to the resilience of all who lived, suffered, and survived.